The moment my daughter told the wedding coordinator to move me out of the front row, I thought there had been a mistake. There wasn't. I had spent months helping pay for the wedding she always dreamed of. I wrote checks when costs climbed, stayed silent when she snapped at me, and convinced myself the stress would pass. Then, on the biggest day of her life, she looked me in the eye and said I didn't belong in the front row anymore. That hurt enough. But 3 days later, she sent me a bill and demanded I pay even more. What happened next changed our family forever. My name is Linda, and I was 56 years old when my daughter, Emma, got married. If you had asked me a year earlier what kind of relationship we had, I would have said we were close. Not perfect, but close. I raised her mostly on my own after her father passed away when she was 12. There were years when money was tight, and years when I worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. But I never regretted a single sacrifice. Emma was my only child. I was there for every school play, every soccer game, every heartbreak, and every achievement. When she graduated college, I cried harder than she did. When she landed her first real job, I celebrated like I'd won the lottery myself. So when she called one evening and announced that her boyfriend, Ryan, had proposed, I couldn't have been happier. The wedding planning started almost immediately. At first, it was exciting. Emma called me constantly. She asked for opinions on venues, flowers, dresses, and decorations. We spent weekends touring event spaces and tasting cakes. For a while, it felt like we were closer than ever. Then, the expenses started growing. The original budget doubled within a few months. Every time a new cost appeared, Emma sounded stressed and overwhelmed. Without being asked, I stepped in. I helped pay for the venue deposit. I covered the photographer. When the florist demanded a larger payment than expected, I handled that too. I told myself it wasn't about the money. It was about helping my daughter have the wedding she deserved. At least, that's what I believed. As the months passed, small changes began to appear. Emma stopped returning calls as quickly. Family dinners became rare. Whenever I offered suggestions, she seemed irritated instead of grateful. Ryan's parents started becoming more involved as well. They were wealthy, polished, and very concerned with appearances. Suddenly, many wedding decisions seemed designed to impress their side of the family. When I mentioned it once, Emma brushed me off. "Mom, not everything is about you." The words stung more than I admitted. Still, I convinced myself she was simply stressed. Wedding planning can make anyone emotional. A few days later, I dropped off another check to help cover unexpected catering costs. Emma thanked me, but her attention never left her phone. For the first time, I felt less like a mother and more like a sponsor. The feeling lingered. Then, 1 week before the wedding, an email arrived containing the final seating chart. I opened it expecting to see my place beside close family. Instead, I froze. My name wasn't in the front row. It wasn't even close. And suddenly, a terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. For 2 days, I stared at that seating chart and tried to convince myself there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe the planner had mixed up the names. Maybe the chart wasn't final. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But the closer the wedding got, the harder it became to ignore the feeling in my stomach. The morning of the ceremony arrived bright and warm. Guests filled the venue. Laughter echoed through the gardens, and everything looked exactly like the dream wedding Emma had spent months creating. The same wedding I had helped pay for. I arrived early and found the wedding coordinator. Politely, I showed her the seating chart. She glanced at it and immediately looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she said. Those instructions came directly from the bride. My heart sank. A few minutes later, I found Emma in the bridal suite. She looked beautiful. For a moment, I forgot about the seating chart completely. She was still my daughter. Then I asked the question, "Emma, why am I sitting in the 5th row?" Her smile disappeared. The answer came so quickly that it felt rehearsed. "Ryan's family is more important for appearances," she said. "They have business associates and relatives coming from out of state. It just makes more sense." I stared at her. "More important than your mother?" She crossed her arms. "Mom, please don't make today about yourself." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because of the seat. because of how easily she said them. After everything, every sacrifice, every late-night shift, every check I had written to help make this wedding happen, I simply nodded. Then I walked away. The ceremony began an hour later. From my seat in the fifth row, I watched strangers occupy places that should have belonged to immediate family. A few guests glanced back at me with confused expressions. Some clearly knew something wasn't right, but I refused to create a scene. Emma looked happy. That mattered more than my pride. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The wedding ended. Photos were taken.
Speeches were made.
I smiled when expected and congratulated the newlyweds. Then I quietly went home. 3 days later, an email notification appeared on my phone. The sender was Emma. I expected thank you photos. Maybe a message about the honeymoon. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. Attached was a detailed invoice listing wedding expenses. At the bottom was a short message. Since costs exceeded our budget, we're asking family members who contributed to help cover the remaining balance. Your portion is $8,400. I read it twice, then 3 times. My hands trembled, not from anger, from disbelief. After everything I had already paid, my daughter was asking for more. But it was a small detail buried in that spreadsheet that truly caught my attention. And the moment I saw it, everything changed. I set my phone down and opened the spreadsheet again. The more I looked at it, the stranger it became. Several expenses listed as unpaid were items I personally remembered covering months earlier. The photographer's deposit was there. The florist's balance appeared again. Even part of the venue reservation was marked as outstanding. At first, I assumed it was a bookkeeping mistake. Then I started checking my records. Over the years, I had developed a habit of saving receipts, invoices, and payment confirmations. It wasn't because I expected gratitude. It was simply how I stayed organized. That evening, I opened an old file cabinet and began sorting through folders. Within an hour, I had everything I needed. Bank statements, email confirmations,
Copies of checks.
signed receipts. One document after another proved the same thing. I had already paid thousands toward the wedding. Far more than the amount Emma was now demanding. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. The spreadsheet hadn't included any of my previous contributions. Whether by accident or design, they had been completely ignored. I sat quietly for several minutes. Part of me wanted to call Emma immediately. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly how hurt I felt. But anger rarely fixes anything. Instead, I drafted a single email. It was short, polite, and impossible to argue with. I attached every receipt and payment record. Then I wrote, Emma, I reviewed the invoice you sent. According to my records, I've already contributed significantly more than the amount listed here. I've attached documentation for each payment. Please review everything carefully before requesting additional money from anyone. That was all. No insults. No accusations. No emotional speech. Just facts. I pressed send. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Emma. For the first time in months, she sounded shaken. Mom, I didn't know about half of these payments. I listened quietly. She admitted Ryan had helped assemble the spreadsheet after the wedding. They had focused only on recent expenses and never reviewed everything that had already been covered. More importantly, she realized something else. Many of the wedding details she'd proudly taken credit for existed because I had stepped in when costs became overwhelming. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. Finally, she said the words I hadn't expected to hear. I'm sorry. Not for the invoice. Not for the money.
For how she had treated me.
A week later, we met for lunch. Emma apologized again, this time face to face. She admitted she had become so focused on impressing other people that she had overlooked the person who had supported her all along. I accepted her apology, but I was honest too. Respect cannot be postponed until after the celebration ends. Family should never be treated like an afterthought. That conversation didn't magically fix everything. Trust takes time to rebuild, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, the most powerful response isn't revenge. It's calmly showing the truth and letting it speak for itself.